There's a fatal inevitability of being in our 50s, 60s and beyond. We're more likely to have built enough wealth to make sure work becomes a little bit more optional. We're more conscious of time and how to spend it. And we're probably more aware of what we love to do and what we don't. But the brutal reality is you and I are closer to death than ever before. But what if I told you that thinking about our impending deaths doesn't need to be depressing, but can actually empower us to live the next chapter of our lives in the best way possible? That's why in this video, I want to consider the Stoic concept of memento mori and highlight the questions you should be asking yourself to live the best next chapter of your lives you can. Welcome to What Happens Next. There's an uncomfortable truth you and probably I would rather ignore. And I've been thinking about it personally a lot recently as I approach my 50s. And yes, before you mention in the comments, I need the reading glasses and I'm getting a few more grey hairs. It highlights one thing. I am closer to death than I've ever been. We all are. You and I the same. Now, it sounds obvious. Of course, as we age, we are all, you and I and everybody, closer to death. But often we ignore the inevitable. I think I started to think about death slightly differently when I lost my mum in 2019, because it made me really think about the preciousness of the commodity we've got, which is time. We also lost a family friend recently who died of cancer in their early 50s. Clearly, there's a lot of grief involved when you lose somebody you love. Certainly there was for I, and there probably has been for you. But there's a strange irony as well, because there is an opportunity to consider your life through the grief you've gone through and really aspire to make the most of it. Because you've worked hard, you've built wealth, you've accumulated experience, you know what matters to you. In some ways, you're freer than ever. Yet the fact that we're closer to death, that shadow of mortality, can linger. But here's the thing. Avoiding death and conversations about death doesn't make it go away. Pretending death is far off can do something that actually doesn't do ourselves any favours. It's thinking that time is infinite. And actually what I want to talk about today is understanding the finite nature of time to make sure that we can make the most of it. And that's why I think facing death and asking yourself questions about death can be the most life-affirming thing you can actually do. Modern Western culture doesn't tend to do that. It avoids the subject of death and focuses more on youth at all costs. But this avoidance of the conversation also has a cost. If you don't think about death, do you really fully think about life? The Stoics knew this well, and they had a simple phrase for it. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. This wasn't meant to be morbid. It wasn't pessimistic. It was a call to arms. Because the Roman emperor in his famous meditations wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. You see, the Stoics believed, as I do, and maybe you should consider, that when you remember time is short, you stop wasting it on stuff that doesn't matter. If you've been putting off those adventures, those conversations, those acts that you really want to get on with in your life, because you've been saying someday, maybe it's the right time to reconsider that approach. Facing death for me, and maybe for you, is not about being gloomy. It's about being urgent, being alive and taking action that's going to move your life in a positive direction. And that actually facing death can become really practical. And I think there's 3 really practical questions that you can ask yourself to help you work out the best next chapter of your life possible. Firstly, if you only lived for another 5 years, would you still be doing what you're doing now? Secondly, if you were only to live for another year, what would you prioritise? What would you focus on that means that you'd spend that year doing what you love, but also doing the stuff that gives you purpose and meaning? And lastly, if you only had one day left, what would you regret? Now, a big shout out to George Kinder. And if you haven't seen my interview with George, it's definitely worth checking out on the What Happens Next channel, because he's been using these questions to help people prioritise what they want to do with their lives for years. Because these questions aren't abstract questions. They're tools designed for you to cut through the noise, have clarity, and get the life you want that's really and fundamentally important to you. Suddenly it becomes obvious what deserves your time and what doesn't. That boring pointless committee you sit on and you know doesn't add any value, get rid of it. That long postponed dream trip to Patagonia, Florence or the Scottish Highlands, do it sooner than you planned. That apology you've been meaning to make and you haven't because of ego and pride, but you know that you've only got a limited time left to make it, do it today. In our younger years, often life can feel endless. We can put things off. There'll always be another chance. We tell ourselves we'll write that book someday. We'll move to the coast later. We'll rebuild that broken friendship when the time is right. But whether you're in your mid-50s, mid-60s, that illusion often falls apart. However, there's one thing I want to be really clear about. Death and thinking about death can be scary, but it doesn't need to be. Instead, it's an invitation to do the things that you care about the most. Because once you accept that your time is finite, it can be, if you want it to be, really liberating. You're freed from trying to live other people's definitions of success, and that's not an immediate process. That often takes a bit of work. Certainly thinking about how you want to spend your time is at the starting point. You're freed often from the weight of what you should do and more focused on what you want to do. And it gives you an opportunity at the starting point to design the life you want to live. There is another dimension here. You see, I believe that thinking about death isn't just about what you do. It's about the journey you go on and who you become. Because one exercise I always find interesting is to imagine your own funeral. Because what would you want people to actually say about you? That you were rich, busy, always on your email? Or that you were generous, adventurous, funny, wise and present? And I think all of us have got a different perspective on what we'd want to be remembered for. But it will give us an insight into what we might want to change about our lives. Also, it's important to remember that considering this isn't a one-time thing. It's a practice refined by a decent number of the ancient philosophers, but also modern-day positive psychologists also advocate for this sort of questioning and thought. You see, in a lot of the ancient philosophies, thinking about death plays a part. Buddhist monks meditate often beside human skulls to remind themselves of their impermanence. Stoics consider death daily as part of a meditative practice, and some modern therapists use deathbed questions, what would you want on your deathbed, to unlock clarity for their clients. Now, I'm not recommending clearly you put a skull on your desk or you spend each hour of every day thinking about death, but the point remains that considering death so we can make the best use of our time is something we might all want to consider and do. Because when you look at death, you might begin to understand time differently. Time is not infinite, it's finite. Now, I've talked about some of these to understand time. I want to give you 3 practical exercises. Time is not infinite, it's finite. Consider death in a more practical way. Number 1 to understand is the eulogy exercise. Write your own eulogy. Infinite, imagine it's finite. Being read by somebody you love. What would you want to understand time differently? Now compare it with your current is life. Not infinite. It's fine. My second exercise that you might want to think about is the game of 5 lives. Imagine there's a multiverse and you get to live 5 different lives. In one you're a painter in Paris, in another you run a vineyard in Spain, in another you're a teacher in South America, a sailor or a doctor. which life lights you up the most and why? Now, I'm not suggesting you throw everything in and go and run a vineyard in Spain, but what it does is give you an indication of what threads of that life you might want to incorporate into your own. And the third exercise give you an indication of what the deathbed regret test. Bronnie Ware give you an indication of brilliant book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Talk to people who are in palliative care in her brilliant book they regretted most in their life. They had 5 people who were in palliative regularly, not living in her brilliant book, working too hard. The people who were in palliative feelings to the people they loved and liked, not staying in touch. The people who were in palliative feelings to the. I'd suggest that it's always worth reflecting on each. Staying in touch. And the people who are in palliative, you might be at risk of regretting at the end of your life, or thinking about what you're regretting at the end of yours today, and what regretting at the end of your. Now, asking these questions are going to be helpful for you to get closer incrementally to the life you want to live. But it's not the only thing I recommend, because we know that life's complex. We know that actually the life you want to live, the next chapter of our lives, involves a lot of moving parts. That's why currently I'm at the end of writing a book about this subject. It's called What Happens Next, and at the end of writing the book, early in 2026, you can join the waiting list. At the end of writing the book. A link is in the show notes below, in the end of writing the book. Or if you're watching this on the screen and you've got it's below in the end of writing the book, take photo of the QR code that's coming up there, and it's below in the end of writing the book waiting list today. All of this contemplation, you'll go straight to the page, death, and the questions we ask, and you can join one more question. What does this all of this contemplation about death and the questions we ask ourselves raises one more question. What does this mean for us right now? Allows us, raises one more question, to make incremental. This means for us right now. Allows us to make incremental positive change in our lives. What have you got to lose? We can be incrementally more incremental positive because you know what matters and what doesn't. Have you got to lose? And you can be more incrementally connected to the people incremental positive change. Have you got to lose? Amazing, and you can be more incrementally connected to the people you love and like, because in Robert Waldinger's amazing book, The Good Life, highest overall well-being. So knowing this, Waldinger's amazing book, The Good Life, prioritising people and not tasks. Now, I like to weave both psychological and philosophical insights into these What Happens Next. Now, I like to weave this, one of our most popular videos, is on Taoism, the Eastern philosophy of Taoism, and what we can perhaps prioritising people on Taoism. And for more Stoic insights into perhaps prioritising people chapter in the next chapter of your life, feel free to take a look here into hopefully that's useful. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you on the channel of your life.